Hello, I'm Hiram, and welcome back to my Python mini video tutorial series. Now, I know what you're thinking from this week. Classes. I don't... When? Huh? I don't recall ever using a class before. What is that? But the truth is, we've been using classes this entire time. For the past 6 weeks, we've been using classes. We just haven't been creating them. So, before I get into creating classes and what they're for and why they're really useful, let me get into the classes that we've been using, and maybe that'll give you an idea and help you understand why we need to create our own, right? So let's dive into that, okay? Okay, I started off by saying that we've been using classes this entire time, we just haven't been creating them, right? So I want to start by showing you a class that we've been exclusively using for the past 5 weeks now. And that class is SimpleGUI. Now, SimpleGUI isn't native to Python. SimpleGUI is a class that Scott, one of our professors, created in order for us to create GUIs using CodeSculptor. Just like the classes that we've seen in the lecture videos, SimpleGUI has methods. See? SimpleGUI.createFrame. That is a method within SimpleGUI called createFrame. Somewhere there is a file with class SimpleGUI, and it has a giant list of methods under it. One of them is createFrame, add button, add label, set draw handler, all of those things are in there. And we've just been sort of picking them out and using them at will without realizing what we've been doing. We've been basically using half of what object-oriented programming is. Half of it is using custom classes that are created, such as SimpleGUI, and the other half is creating custom classes ourselves. So hopefully that removes some of the mystery behind object-oriented programming, or at least using it. We've become accustomed to using it, we just haven't become accustomed to what it actually is. So I'm going to take a little break, and when I come back, I'm going to create a simple program that uses a class, and it just draws a couple dots on the screen or something like that, and I'll go through each method that I create and sort of describe what it is that each one does and how it's going to be called and used. So let's get to that, shall we? Okay, so I'm going to write a simple program, and all it's going to do is it's going to draw a dot at a random point on the screen. That's all it's going to do. And I'm going to go ahead and use object-oriented programming to create a dot class and implement that class into the draw. So let's go through this really quickly. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import SimpleGUI, and I'm also going to import random because I want the dot to be drawn on a different part of the screen every time I load the program, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Next, I'm going to set up some variables, which are going to be these are my width and my height of my canvas, and then I'm also going to set the radius of the dot. It's going to be 20, and the color of the dot. Right? Now, next I'm going to actually create the dot class. Now, it's not required, but I do encourage every time you create a class that you capitalize it. Normally what I do is functions and variables are lowercase, while classes have a capital first letter. It just makes it easier to differentiate is all. So when you create a class, you just do class dot colon, no apostrophe, just a colon. And the first thing I want to do is I want to define the init method. Now, the init method does something simple. Well, for starters, what does init mean? Init is just short for initialize. This is the method that creates the sort of parameters for the class and does all of the work. It does a bunch of work when the class is first created, when an object of the class is first created. You can think of it as a combination of just having code in a function and having parameters for the function. Right? So the parameters that go into the init method are the actual parameters that you're going to put into the dot when you create an object of it. So for my dot, I'm going to have, for my dot init, I'm actually going to have a few parameters. I want to have the radius of the dot, the color, the width of the canvas, and the height of the canvas. Now the reason I'm going to have the width and the height of the canvas in there is because that's going to be the width and the height that the dot is going to be drawn within. It's going to be, those are the bounds that it's going to be drawn within. And self, you keep self here every method has self in it. It's the first thing in every method. It's just telling it that this is going to work on the dot class. So next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and set some variables here. So set color, self color equals color, self radius is equal to radius, and self position, this one's going to get a little bit tricky. So before I get into that, why am I setting these? Well, I want to be able to use these later, self-color, self-radius, and self-position. So I'm setting them like that because they're going to be saved inside of the object as a sort of parameters of the object, if you will. Whereas color is just a variable parameter that's only used within this method. It's not going to be used within any other methods. So I'm going to set it to the self.color because self is used in all of the methods within the class. So position, I want to give it a random position within random dot with I want to give it a random position within the range of the within the borders of the canvas, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm just saying this is the x coordinate right here, which is saying give me a random number between 0 plus the radius of the ball and the width of the canvas minus the radius of the ball. That way we can keep the entire ball within the canvas. If I was just to do from 0 to width, then half of the ball could possibly be off of the canvas. And that's the x, and then my y is going to be the same thing, just using the height. So random.randRange, randRange, and it's going to be 0 plus the radius, and then the height minus the radius of the ball. Okay? Now, notice I didn't make a self.height and a self.width because the width and the height are the width and the height of the canvas, and I don't need them in order. The only time I'm going to be using them is right here in setting the position of the ball. I'm not actually going to use it any other time during the creation of this class or when I'm making the dot. So I'm not creating a self.width and height variables that are going to be used. Although I did create global variables which will be used outside of that class. Okay, so that's actually all I'm going to do for the initialize. So let me go over once again what this is going to do. When we call the class object, when we call the dot object, we're going to say something equals dot, and then in parentheses we're going to put in the parameters that are set up in init, excluding self, which is the object itself. So I'm going to put in the radius, the color, the width, and the height. Luckily, I only have to type in radius, color, width, and height, so because I've already set up those variables. The next method that I'm going to define is the draw method. Now, this method is going to allow the dot, to draw itself on the, I am sorry for all these notification sounds, I'm getting emails like crazy. It's going to allow itself to draw, it's going to allow it to draw itself onto the canvas, and all I have to do is pass the dot draw method into the draw method into the draw handler for the canvas, which is going to be very simple. So I'm going to draw it here, canvas dot draw circle. Oops, I can't spell today. Draw circle, and it's going to be its position, self dot position. See, that's why I made that self dot position. Self dot radius. See, call back to that. The line width, which is just going to be 1, and then self.color, which is the line color, and then self.color again for the fill color. And that's actually all I'm going to be doing for the dot class. I'm just giving it an initializer, which is going to be the parameters that first go in when you call the dot object. And I'm just going to set a couple variables that are going to be used later on in the draw method. That's it. Next, I'm actually going to create a draw handler. I'm going to call that draw handler canvas, and all it's going to do is going to call the dot.draw method, but I haven't created the dot object, so for now let's just leave it here. Now let's create the dot object. So I'm going to do lowercase d. See, this is why I tell you capitalization is very important. Equals dot, and then the parameters that dot is going to take when I first create it. That's what the initializer is, the init. These parameters are these four right here, which luckily enough I can just copy and paste because they're already set as variables. So what is this doing? This is creating a variable called dot, right? And it's setting it equal to the dot, well, it's creating an object now, the dot class with the initialized parameters, radius, color, width, and height, right? So it's creating a dot object is what it's doing. Next, I'm just going to create my frame, which, what am I doing right now? I'm doing the exact same thing, but I'm using Simple GUI. I'm creating, let's call this dot, not DTO, dot. I'm creating the exact same thing. I just created a Simple GUI, a Simple GUI frame object by running Simple GUI.createFrame with its parameters. Now, createFrame is a method within Simple GUI, but look at how similar these two look, right? Very similar, because they're essentially the same. They're essentially the same thing as far as object-oriented programming goes. They're both classes that are being used. It's just dot is a class that I defined myself, while Simple GUI is a class that was defined by Scott. And then I'm going to go to frame.setDrawHandler. These are just simple things that we've been doing this entire time. And frame.start, right? Once again, these are just methods within the Simple GUI class. And now I'm going to go back to my draw handler, and I'm just going to pass one simple thing. Draw canvas. So I'm using the draw method that I put in my dot class, right? Oops, this is supposed to be draw handler. There you go. I'm using the draw method that I put into my dot class right here, and I'm passing canvas, the canvas as in the right here, which is the parameter that it takes. And once again, self just means that you're using it. You're using whatever is set equal to that class, the object. You're using the object itself, right? So I'm doing basically what this is right here, frame.setDrawHandler, right? I'm using Simple GUI's setDrawHandler method on frame, because frame is a Simple GUI object. And then I'm just going to run this, see if it works. I don't know why this is getting so huge lately. Alright, so it created a dot in the upper right corner of the screen. So theoretically, oh, look at that. If I keep running this, it's just going to draw the dot in random locations. And that's all it's going to do. Just keep drawing the dot in a different random location over and over again. And it seems to be working. So let me just go through this one more time. I imported Simple GUI and Random, which are classes created by Scott in order to run CodeSculptor, use Python in CodeSculptor. I created my variables for this is my width and height for my canvas, this is my radius for my ball, and this is the color for my dot, excuse me. I created a dot class, which is just like Scott created the Simple GUI class, except mine is considerably shorter and did not require as much work. And then I have an initializer right here, an initializer method, which, once again, the initializer is basically it's accepting the initial parameters for creating the dot object, right? These are the initial parameters. This is the stuff that initially happens, the first stuff to happen. And then I created the draw method, which just draws the ball, right? The dot on the screen. And then I have my draw handler, just like we're all used to, which uses my draw method on my dot. I created my dot object. I created my frame object. Remember, these are very similar. These are like cousins. This is a much older, smarter cousin, and this is the new, kind of dumb cousin. But still, they're cousins. And right here, you know, set draw handler, stuff that we've been used to, stuff that object-orientating programming is made out of, that we've been doing the entire time, we just haven't been creating. So hopefully all of this has been a step in the right direction, and at least a good explanation of the importance of object-orientated programming, and a little introduction, at least a simpler introduction of how to use it, how to create classes, not just how to use them, right? So With that said, I'll be signing off. Have a good day.